My husband raised his glass at a birthday dinner, smiling like he was delivering civilized news. "I want to date other women," he announced, suggesting I fight to win him back if I truly loved him. The table held its breath, expecting me to shatter. I just laughed. I realized then this was not mere infidelity. He had pre-written this script to steal our money, protect his reputation, and control our shared narrative before walking out the door. My name is Lillian Moore. I am 38 years old, and I work in the corporate compliance department for Cindervale Transit Systems. My professional life is dedicated to hunting down deviations, systemic errors, and the quiet, mundane frauds hidden deep within spreadsheets and company policies. I am trained to look for the tiny threads that people desperately try to hide. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, with my husband, Grant Hollowell. He is 41 years old, the charming, charismatic co-founder of a high-end boutique hospitality design studio called Ridgeway Atelier. We were, by all outward metrics and societal standards, a resounding success story. We had the beautiful house, the lucrative careers, and the perfectly curated life. The evening that shattered this illusion took place at a dinner party hosted by our wealthy friends, the Millers, the undisputed anchors of our local social circle. It was a flawless setup, the absolute peak of upper-middle-class American perfection. The dining room smelled of roasted rosemary, garlic, and expensive beeswax candles. The ambient lighting was carefully curated to cast a warm, forgiving glow, making everyone look at least 10 years younger than their actual age. There were 8 of us seated around a massive, custom-built mahogany table. We were passing heavy silver platters of artisanal cheeses, imported roasted figs, and pouring vintage red wine that cost several $100s a bottle. It was merely a Tuesday night. But in this specific tax bracket, Tuesday was treated exactly like a Saturday, just with slightly better behavior and slightly earlier bedtimes. Right after the main course was cleared by the quiet catering staff, Grant tapped his heavy silver butter knife against the delicate edge of his crystal wine glass. The sharp, high-pitched chime cut violently through the warm murmurs of conversation about commercial real estate investments and upcoming summer European vacations. He stood up. He slowly smoothed the front of his tailored linen shirt. He looked around the table, making deliberate, practiced eye contact with our friends before his gaze finally landed heavily on me. He wore a smile of supreme, enlightened calm, looking exactly like a man who was about to deliver a profound speech on emotional evolution. "I want to make a toast to honesty," Grant began, his voice perfectly modulated and smooth. "Lillian and I have built a truly wonderful life together, but I have recently come to a deep realization. I do not want a divorce. I care for you deeply, Lillian. However, I want the freedom to explore connections with other women. I believe our marriage can evolve beyond these outdated, traditional constraints." He paused, letting his ridiculous words hang in the air, marinating in his own perceived bravery and transparency. Then, he delivered the killing blow, his eyes locking onto mine. "If you truly love me, Lillian, and if you value what we have built over the years, you should fight for me. You should fight to prove that I am worth keeping. Let us see how strong our bond really is." The silence that instantly fell over the dining room was absolute, heavy, and totally suffocating. You could have heard a single pin drop onto the thick Persian rug. The light clinking of silverware vanished completely. The host, David, froze entirely with a wine bottle hovering awkwardly over an empty glass. His wife, Sarah, stared intently at her own lap. Her face suddenly flushed a deep, embarrassed crimson. The other couples stopped breathing entirely, sinking back into their velvet chairs. They were all waiting for the explosion. They expected the familiar, messy script of a deeply betrayed wife. They were braced for me to burst into violent tears, to hurl my heavy glass of Cabernet right into his smug face, to scream profanities, or to drop to my knees and beg him to reconsider his madness. They were waiting for me to shatter into a million jagged pieces right there beside the half-eaten dessert tarts. Instead, I looked at Grant. I looked at the man I had slept next to for thousands of nights, carefully noting the rehearsed posture, the theatrical tilt of his chin, the utter and complete absence of genuine vulnerability, and I laughed. It was not a hysterical, broken laugh. It was not a bitter, weeping cackle meant to mask pain. It was a short, sharp, genuine bark of pure amusement. It was quiet, but it sliced through the dead, awkward air of the dining room with lethal, surgical precision. Grant's enlightened, arrogant smile faltered immediately. His broad shoulders stiffened. He was fully prepared for rage. He was fully prepared for crippling sorrow. He was completely unequipped for quiet mockery. "I do not compete for trophies, Grant," I said, my voice steady, entirely conversational, and completely void of the frantic desperation he so desperately craved. "And I certainly do not enter contests to win a man who has already placed himself on a discount display shelf." The healthy color drained completely from his face. For a fleeting second, the polished, confident mask slipped, revealing a quick flash of genuine, ugly panic. He opened his mouth to speak, desperate to reclaim the narrative he had so carefully constructed. But I was already standing up. I calmly placed my white linen napkin on the table, aligning the edges perfectly parallel to my dessert fork. As I reached across the table for my leather clutch bag near his elbow, I noticed his hands. His knuckles were bone white as he gripped the fragile stem of his wine glass, practically strangling it. Then, right beside his clenched fist, his smartphone screen illuminated against the dark wood of the table. A text message had arrived. It was from a contact saved simply as SM. The preview text glared up at me. It read, "Did you tell them yet? Thinking of you." A cold, incredibly sharp clarity washed over me in that exact moment. This speech was not a sudden, alcohol-fueled burst of truth. This was not a messy midlife crisis spilling over after too much rich food. This was a highly scheduled, carefully orchestrated broadcast. "Thank you for dinner, Sarah. Everything was absolutely lovely," I said to our host, who was still staring up at me with wide, terrified eyes. I turned on my heel and walked out of the dining room. I did not look back at my husband. I did not run or stumble. I walked with measured, even steps through the grand foyer, pushed open the heavy oak front door, and stepped out into the cool, humid North Carolina night. When I got into my car, the silence inside the cabin was total and absolute. There were no tears burning the backs of my eyes. There was no physical, crushing ache in my chest. If anything, I felt an eerie, terrifying calm settling deep into my bones. My mind, trained for over a decade to hunt down systemic discrepancies and audit elaborate corporate lies, instantly shifted gears. I did not drive home. I pulled out of the upscale, quiet neighborhood and just drove, letting the tires eat up the miles along the dark, winding roads of Charlotte. I drove for over an hour, watching the yellow streetlights bleed across the glass of the windshield. As I drove through the night, the past 14 months began to rapidly reassemble themselves in my mind. I was no longer viewing them as fond memories, but as hard data points. The anomaly report was suddenly running at full speed in the background of my consciousness. I thought about the subtle, strange changes. He had started spending 2 extra hours at the luxury gym every single evening. He bought a whole new wardrobe that belonged on a man 10 years his junior. There were the mysterious networking dinners that never seemed to result in actual new contracts or clients for Ridgeway Atelier. There was the subtle, almost imperceptible shift in his energy when he came home late. He was never exhausted from a hard day of creative work. Instead, he was buzzing with a strange, distant, and frantic electricity. I remembered him suddenly changing the security passcode on our shared living room tablet. I remembered the exact way he started carrying his phone into the bathroom while he showered, always ensuring he placed the screen face down on the marble counter. In the world of corporate compliance, we call these glaring red flags, but in a marriage, you call them paranoia, right up until the exact moment they become concrete evidence. I navigated a sharp curve, the bright headlights sweeping across the dark. heavy trunks of ancient oak trees. My mind was razor sharp, violently slicing through the sentimental fog that usually blinds a betrayed spouse. Grant had not raised his glass tonight to ask for personal freedom. He had not made that speech because he was a brave pioneer of modern, open relationships. He made that speech because he desperately needed an audience. He needed David and Sarah and the rest of our influential friends to hear him offer a civilized, highly progressive arrangement. More importantly, he needed them to witness me completely reject it. He was actively, intentionally manufacturing witnesses for a version of the truth that heavily favored him. When the marriage inevitably imploded, Grant would not be the cheating, lying villain who cruelly abandoned his wife for another woman. He would be the honest, transparent man who valiantly tried to be truthful, only to be met with my rigid, unforgiving refusal to evolve with him. He had set an emotional trap right there at the dinner table, fully expecting me to stumble blindly into the role of the hysterical, inadequate, and emotionally unstable wife. I pressed my foot down harder on the accelerator, the powerful engine roaring slightly in the quiet. Empty night. Grant truly thought he was a brilliant, untouchable strategist. He thought he had completely outsmarted me, successfully painting me into a tiny corner where my only viable options were public humiliation or devastating loss. But my husband had forgotten one crucial, fatal detail about the woman he married. He had forgotten what I do for a living. I am a compliance officer. I do not react to complex fraud with tears and begging. I react by quietly gathering the evidence, building an airtight file, and methodically dismantling the entire corrupt operation from the inside out. The war had not just begun tonight. It had been silently raging in my own home for months. The only difference was that tonight, I finally opened my eyes and realized I was standing directly on the battlefield, 14 months before the Miller dinner. The tectonic plates of my marriage began to shift. It was not a sudden, violent earthquake that tore the ground apart overnight. It was a slow, silent continental drift. I did not wake up one morning to find a complete stranger standing in my kitchen. The stranger arrived piece by piece, slipping through the door in increments so tiny they were almost invisible. I remember the exact morning the atmosphere in our master bathroom changed. Grant stepped out of the glass shower enclosure, and instead of his usual, reliable sandalwood shaving cream, the air was suddenly sharp with the scent of crushed juniper and heavy wood smoke. It was an aggressive, undeniably single-man fragrance. When I casually asked him about it, he brushed it off, claiming a vendor at a trade show had shoved a sample bottle into his briefcase. Then came the meticulous, almost obsessive grooming routines. He started buying $70 exfoliating facial serums. He spent 20 minutes every single morning examining his jawline in the magnified mirror. He stopped slouching at the breakfast table. His daily schedule, once predictable and steady, began to fracture into vague, untraceable blocks of time. The excuses evolved from standard late nights at the office into highly specific, yet entirely unconfirmable events. It was a mandatory design walkthrough at a downtown boutique hotel site that was running behind schedule. It was an impromptu round of client drinks with a potential investor flying in from Atlanta. When he finally came through the front door at 11:30 at night, he did not drop his heavy leather bag and sigh like a man who had just worked a grueling 14-hour day. Instead, he vibrated. He hummed softly while pouring a glass of iced water in the dark kitchen. His eyes were wide, bright, and focused on something miles away from our home. He was physically standing on our hardwood floors, but his restless, crackling energy belonged to a completely different zip code. He was not exhausted by his life. He was exhilarated by a secret one. His digital paranoia escalated far beyond simply turning a phone face down on a table. His heavy silver laptop became an actual physical extension of his body. If he went to the kitchen to grab an apple from the fridge, the laptop came with him, clamped tightly under his arm. If he stepped out to the patio to check the temperature on the grill, the laptop rested on the outdoor dining table right beside him. I once walked up behind him to hand him a fresh mug of coffee, and his hand violently slammed the screen down with a loud, Sharp crack. He immediately blamed it on a highly confidential client bidding war. But his heart was beating so hard beneath his cotton shirt that I could physically see the fabric moving. My mind, rigorously trained for over a decade to audit corporate ledgers and hunt for systemic fraud, began subconsciously cataloging the paper trail of his new reality. They were microtransactions. They were meant to be invisible, the kind of financial dust that never triggers a joint account fraud alert. But dust accumulates. While emptying his pockets before taking clothes to the dry cleaner, I found a crumpled, faded receipt for $22 for valet parking in South End, a trendy, neon-lit neighborhood where Ridgeway Atelier had absolutely zero active development projects. A week later, a thin slip of paper fluttered out of his trousers onto the laundry room floor. It was a cocktail lounge tab for $45, time-stamped at 1:45 in the afternoon, on a Tuesday. Then, reviewing our monthly credit card statement, I noticed a charge for $75 from an artisanal florist located downtown. No hydrangeas or white lilies ever arrived at my office desk or our front porch to provide a smokescreen for this bizarre, shifting behavior. His older sister Marin began dropping by our house with alarming, uncharacteristic frequency. Marin was a divorced, high-strung real estate broker who had always treated Grant like a fragile, misunderstood genius. She would sit at my kitchen island, sipping her hot matcha latte, and preemptively build defensive walls around his absences before I even had the chance to complain. "You really have to understand, Lillian," Marin said one Sunday afternoon, swirling the green liquid in her ceramic mug. "Creative men in their early 40s go through this terrifying identity crisis. The pressure is immense. He is just trying to figure out who he is outside of the firm and the mortgage. You just have to give him a very wide berth right now. It is just a phase of middle-aged recalibration." I realize now she was actively laying the groundwork. They all were. Grant himself started testing the structural integrity of our marriage with abstract, philosophical debates, always safely framed as purely intellectual exercises. We would be sitting on the sofa watching a documentary, and he would casually mute the television to muse about human nature, staring out the large living room window into the dark yard. "Do you ever think the traditional marriage model is inherently flawed?" he asked me one evening, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon. "I mean, asking one single human being to fulfill your emotional, intellectual, and physical needs for 50 straight years. It seems almost biologically unnatural. Do you not think evolved people should be free from such an outdated, restrictive construct?" He always stopped his speeches right at the edge of the cliff. If I pushed back and asked him if he was unhappy, he would simply laugh, kiss my forehead, and claim he was just playing devil's advocate. But he was not debating modern sociology. He was measuring my emotional temperature. He was checking to see if the lock on the front door was loose enough to easily pick. The physical evidence of his quiet departure finally manifested in the Daily Mail. I was tidying up the coffee table, gathering a disorganized stack of heavy architectural magazines. Slipped deep between the glossy pages of a design digest was a crisp, heavy stock white envelope. It was from a boutique wealth management firm we had never once utilized. It was addressed exclusively to Grant. As I pulled it out to place it on his desk, he walked into the room. I have never seen a man move so incredibly fast while desperately trying to look casual. He practically snatched the envelope from my fingers with a sharp, breathless laugh. "Just aggressive junk mail for the business," he said quickly, but the muscle in his jaw was ticking furiously. His eyes were completely dark, filled with a sudden, freezing hostility that genuinely shocked me. It was the frantic, dangerous look of a man violently defending his hidden escape route, but the absolute loudest warning sign was the total, deafening silence regarding our house. For 3 years, we had spent almost every Sunday morning meticulously planning a massive kitchen and rear sunroom renovation. We had thick binders full of imported marble samples, unlacquered brass fixture catalogs, and detailed structural blueprints. It was our grand, shared vision for our future in that house. About 9 months ago, those heavy binders quietly disappeared into the bottom drawer of his home office. He completely stopped mentioning the structural engineer. When I asked him if we should finally put down the 20% deposit for the custom oak cabinets before the prices increased, he waved a hand dismissively, not even looking up from his phone screen. "Let us hold off until the next financial quarter," he said flatly. "Interest rates are completely wild right now. We do not need to rush into tearing up the floors." He was no longer investing a single dollar or thought into the foundation of our home because he had already packed his bags in his head. He knew with absolute certainty that he would not be standing in that kitchen to see the new marble installed. I learned the hardest lesson of my life during those long, quiet months. Betrayal is rarely a sudden, dramatic explosion. It does not begin with a passionate first kiss in a dark, secret hotel hallway. It does not begin with a whispered confession of love to a beautiful stranger. It begins in the suffocating, mundane quiet of your own living room. It begins the exact moment a person decides to start living a completely parallel life right next to you, breathing the exact same air, sleeping on the exact same high thread count sheets, while quietly, methodically dismantling the floorboards beneath your feet. In my line of work at Cindervale Transit Systems, I do not look at human behavior as a messy, emotional narrative. I am not paid to understand the romantic whims or the existential dread of corporate employees. I am paid to find the deviations. When a process breaks down, it always leaves a trail of breadcrumbs in the system. People are remarkably predictable creatures. When they lie, they create patterns to cover those lies. My brain is permanently wired to track those patterns. A marriage, I realized in the dead of the night, is just another system with its own set of standard operating procedures, and my husband was actively cooking the books. When I finally returned home from my long drive after the disastrous dinner party, the house was entirely dark. The security system chirped a soft, singular note as I opened the front door. Grant was already upstairs in the master bedroom, likely asleep, resting peacefully after delivering his grand performance to our friends. I did not walk up the curved staircase to confront him. I did not storm into the room to demand answers or scream until my throat was raw. Emotional confrontations are a waste of energy when you do not possess all the facts. Instead, I walked directly into his home office, a beautiful room lined with custom oak bookshelves that I had helped design. I sat down at the heavy leather desk chair. I did not turn on the overhead lights. I only opened my personal laptop, letting the stark blue glow illuminate my face. I needed raw data. I started with the most logical foundation. I navigated to our joint family financial portal. This was a centralized wealth management dashboard we had set up years ago to track our checking, savings, and shared investment portfolios. It used to be a point of pride for us, a digital monument to our shared success. Now, it was a crime scene. I exported the transaction logs for the past 12 months into a massive raw spreadsheet. I began applying custom sorting filters, eliminating the mundane, everyday expenses like the grocery store, the utility bills, and the mortgage payments. I was hunting for the anomalies. It did not take long for the cold, hard mathematics to reveal exactly what his vague philosophical speeches had been designed to hide. There was a repeating vendor name that kept surfacing in the outgoing transfer column. The entity was called Blue Aster Strategies LLC. It sounded like a perfectly innocuous corporate vendor. It sounded like a boutique branding agency or a high-end market research firm that Ridgeway Atelier might legitimately hire. But these transfers were not coming from his business account. They were slowly, methodically draining from our joint high-yield savings. I looked at the specific dollar amounts. $4,900 here, $4,850 there. They were always deliberately sized just under the $5,000 threshold. I know exactly why he chose those numbers. In standard banking algorithms, a transfer of exactly $5,000 or more from a personal savings account often triggers an automated fraud alert or requires a secondary manual verification step via text message. He was structuring the payments. He was keeping the theft quiet, flying just under the radar of the bank security protocols. Then, I cross-referenced the precise timestamps of these transfers against my own corporate Outlook calendar. A sudden, freezing wave of clarity washed over me. The outgoing wires to Blue Aster Strategies, LLC, almost always occurred on Tuesday mornings right at 10 o'clock, or on Thursday afternoons exactly at 2 o'clock. Those specific time blocks were not random. They perfectly aligned with my mandatory, department-wide compliance review meetings. He knew with absolute certainty that I would be sitting in a glass conference room, presenting slide decks to transit executives. He knew my phone would be on silent. He knew I would not be checking personal bank notifications. He was stealing from our future during the exact hours I was actively working to build it. I dug deeper into the digital archives. I clicked into the document center of our primary mutual fund. I noticed the green toggle switch for electronic document delivery had been quietly turned off roughly 3 months ago. I opened the account profile settings. The primary mailing address was no longer our house in Charlotte. It had been legally changed to a private postal box located in a strip mall 15 miles away in a neighboring town. He had successfully diverted the physical paper trail of our shrinking assets to a location I did not even know existed. Financial data is crucial, but I also needed geographical data. I needed to know the physical coordinates of his lies. I logged into the cloud-based web portal tied to his luxury sport utility vehicle. We originally installed the application for emergency roadside assistance and routine maintenance tracking. It logs daily mileage, engine health, and, most importantly, precise GPS parking locations. I pulled the location history for the previous 90 days and placed the map data side by side with his shared iCloud calendar. According to his beautifully color-coded schedule, his Wednesday afternoons were almost exclusively dedicated to site visits for upcoming commercial projects or long networking lunches with potential investors. The GPS coordinates told a completely different, much more sinister story. Twice a week, for the past 4 months. The vehicle was not parked at a dusty construction site or a downtown steakhouse. It was consistently parked for 3 to 4 hours inside the subterranean resident garage of a building called the Montgomery. The Montgomery is a brand-new, ultra-luxury high-rise apartment complex located on the north side of the city. Ridgeway Atelier does not design residential apartments. They design boutique hotels and commercial hospitality spaces. A married 41-year-old man does not spend 3 hours in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon inside a residential high-rise to discuss architecture. My hands were steady as they moved across the keyboard. My breathing was slow and measured. The picture was becoming devastatingly clear. But the final, undeniable shock was still waiting for me in the shared network drive. I opened the folder on our home server labeled Mortgage Refinance. We had refinanced the house 3 years ago to secure a lower interest rate. I scrolled past the old property appraisals and the standard bank disclosures. Tucked away at the very bottom of the directory was a subfolder created only 2 months ago. I double-clicked it. Inside was a single, heavy digital document. It was a supplementary loan agreement. It was an application and approval for a massive home equity line of credit, borrowing directly against the equity we had built in our home over the last decade. I scrolled down to the final page of the portable document format file. There, glowing brightly on the screen, was my signature. It was a perfect, flawless electronic replica of my cursive handwriting, stamped right next to his. I stared at the blue ink on the white background. The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly thin. I had never seen this document in my entire life. I had never sat down at a table to authorize a secondary line of credit. I had never consented to leveraging our home. He had not simply forged a signature. He had likely used the saved digital signature file from our original refinance paperwork 3 years ago and applied it to this new, fraudulent application. I leaned back in the heavy leather chair. The truth was no longer a vague suspicion. It was a cold, hard, mathematically proven reality. Grant was not experiencing a midlife crisis. He was not genuinely struggling with the confines of a traditional marriage. He was not clumsily wandering out of the relationship to find emotional fulfillment. He was executing a highly structured, legally dangerous exit strategy. He was quietly liquidating our shared marital assets, diverting funds to shell companies, hiding the paper trails, and secretly leveraging the roof over my head to finance his new life. The speech at the dinner party was nothing more than a carefully timed distraction, a brilliant piece of theater designed to make him look like a progressive victim while he robbed me blind behind the curtain. I did not shed a single tear. The woman who loved Grant Hollowell had evaporated the moment I saw that forged signature. I opened a fresh, encrypted external hard drive. I began taking high-resolution screenshots of every single bank ledger, every changed postal address, every global positioning system coordinate from the Montgomery, and every page of the fraudulent loan agreement. I opened a blank document and started building a meticulous, chronological timeline of his actions. I was no longer a betrayed wife desperately trying to understand her failing marriage. I was a compliance officer, and I had just opened a massive, devastating internal investigation. I needed a professional architect of my own to navigate this incoming demolition. The morning after my late-night financial audit, I sat in the muted, gray office of Evelyn Pike. Evelyn was not the kind of family lawyer who advertised on highway billboards or television commercials. She charged $900 an hour and operated out of an unmarked, brutalist concrete building on the exact edge of the financial district. She was the kind of attorney you found through hushed, terrified conversations in country club locker rooms, a woman who specialized in quietly dismantling high-net-worth marriages before the ink on the public filings even had a chance to dry. I slid my encrypted flash drive across her polished glass desk and laid out my findings. She did not offer me a box of tissues. She did not offer sympathetic nods or platitudes about broken hearts. Her expression remained as completely still as a frozen lake. "Do absolutely nothing," Evelyn instructed. Her voice clipped, precise, and cold. "You have an advantage most betrayed spouses never get. Lillian, you have the element of total surprise. But if you confront him now, if you show your hand, he will panic. He will immediately shred the remaining evidence, move the hidden funds into offshore shell accounts, and launch a preemptive public smear campaign. You must become a ghost in your own home. You will go back. You will make his morning coffee, and you will ask him how his day went. You must keep him completely comfortable so he continues to make sloppy mistakes." I went back to work. I became a phantom, smiling through the sickening, daily charade of our domestic life. But during my lunch hours at the Transit Authority, I conducted what we in the Compliance Division call a soft background sweep. The initials on the text message from the dinner party were painfully easy to decode once I cross-referenced his new professional social media connections with the geographical data I had pulled from his vehicle. Her name was Sloan Mercer. She marketed herself as a freelance personal brand repositioning consultant, a highly inflated, buzzword-heavy title favored by wealthy tech founders and restless venture capitalists who wanted to be seen as thought leaders. Sloan charged $3,000 a day for her consulting services. She posted daily online affirmations about disruptive innovation and stepping into your authentic power. As I dug deeper into her public digital footprint, a pathetic, almost laughable truth emerged. Sloan was not the only woman Grant was actively pursuing. There were dozens of deleted comments on fitness pages, late-night direct messages sent to young interior design interns, and subtle digital flirting scattered across multiple platforms. My husband was a serial, desperate flirt, addicted to the shallow validation of strangers. But Sloan was remarkably different from the interns. Sloan was the only one receiving the diverted thousands from our shared savings. She was not simply a mistress. She was an active business investment. Grant was literally using my hard-earned corporate salary to pay for his own midlife rebranding campaign. The final devastating pieces of his master plan were sitting right in our living room. One evening, while Grant was out at yet another fabricated networking dinner, I picked up the communal tablet we usually use to control the smart home audio system. He had recently changed the passcode, but people are fundamentally lazy creatures of habit. They constantly recycle numerical patterns. It took me exactly 3 attempts to unlock the device using the birth year of his favorite modernist architect, combined with his college graduation year, buried deep within a forgotten cloud storage folder. I found a 50-page presentation slide deck. It was a highly polished, formal business pitch for a new venture called the Horizon Group, described as a revolutionary hospitality concept studio. But the business plan was deeply, intimately intertwined with a strict timeline for his personal life. Slide 12 of the presentation was literally titled Personal Life Repositioning Strategy. Slide 24 was a financial projection chart for the first 3 years of this new studio. Under the initial capital investment section, he had listed a sum of $400,000. That was the exact estimated value of the home equity line of credit he had secretly taken out using my forged signature. He was actively planning to build his new empire using the stolen bricks of my house. There were detailed speaker notes attached to the bottom of the slides. Reading them made the blood in my veins run completely cold. He had outlined the dinner party at the Miller's house weeks in advance. He explicitly referred to the dinner as a narrative milestone. His notes dictated that he needed to publicly declare his desire for an open, evolved marriage in front of influential witnesses. The strategy was laid out in bullet points. Present the concept as an honest progression of love. Force Lillian into a highly public emotional reaction. And then frame her inevitable rejection as concrete proof that she was rigid, unyielding, and totally unable to accept a progressive lifestyle. He wrote that this public stance would effectively protect his brand identity within the liberal, artistic circles of his industry. He was planning to use my traditional values as a weapon to destroy my social reputation while simultaneously elevating his own. But the betrayal extended far beyond my husband's own twisted mind. Linked directly to the messaging application on the tablet were synced conversations with his older sister, Marin, the exact same woman who had sat at my kitchen island drinking expensive matcha lattes and defending his supposed identity crisis, was the active co-author of his victimhood. I read through long text threads where she actively workshopped manipulative phrases for him to use on me. "Tell her you feel emotionally suffocated," Marin had typed on a Tuesday afternoon. "Make sure you use the word authentic as much as possible. People absolutely love that word right now. It makes you sound like a tortured soul trapped in a cold marriage, not just a guy trying to sleep with a younger consultant." The sickening feeling in my stomach twisted even tighter when I scrolled further down and saw a message from Grant's mother, his sweet, soft-spoken mother, the woman who sent me hand-knitted scarves every single Christmas for a decade. She had texted him 2 weeks prior to the dinner party. "Just make sure you file the initial separation papers before the end of the second quarter. Grant," his mother wrote. "My accountant said doing it before July 1st will make dividing the joint investment portfolios much less messy for you. Do not let her drag this out and ruin your new studio launch." The entire family was acting like a board of directors for his infidelity. They were treating our decade-long marriage like a failing corporate merger that needed to be liquidated with maximum financial efficiency. Suddenly, his arrogant challenge at the dinner table made perfect, terrifying sense. When he told me to fight to prove I was worth keeping, I had initially thought it was just the pathetic, swollen ego of a narcissist. But it was far more calculated than that. It was deliberately engineered bait. He threw that specific line out like a lit match onto dry gasoline, desperately hoping I would scream, cry, throw my wine glass, or create a massive scene in front of our wealthy friends. He needed me to act crazy. He needed me to be the emotional, unstable villain so he could easily walk away looking like the calm, rational victim who just wanted to live his truth. My short, genuine laughter that night had completely derailed his carefully constructed timeline. By flatly refusing to participate in his public theater, I had denied him the explosive reaction he so desperately required to justify his exit strategy to our peers. I closed the tablet and placed it exactly where I found it on the glass coffee table, ensuring it was angled perfectly parallel to the stone coasters. I sat in the silent, dark living room and stared blankly at the empty wall. The man I married was not a free spirit suffocating under the heavy, outdated yoke of monogamy. He was not a tortured artist seeking a new muse to spark his creativity. He was a corporate risk manager. He was systematically mitigating the social and financial fallout of his own betrayal, hedging his bets, and using the gentle language of modern therapy as a civilized, acceptable coat of paint over a remarkably dirty, primitive plan. He did not want freedom. He wanted a fully funded escape pod, and he expected me to quietly pay the bill for his departure. Evelyn Pike did not waste a single hour. By the following Wednesday, she had connected me with Naomi Voss, a forensic accountant who specialized in dissecting the financial cadavers of high-net-worth divorces. Naomi operated out of a sterile, windowless office that smelled faintly of ozone and old paper. She was a woman of few words, preferring the absolute certainty of ledger balances over messy human narratives. I handed over the encrypted drive containing the initial screenshots of the home equity line of credit, the Blue Aster Strategies transfers, and the vehicle location data. It took Naomi less than 48 hours to perform a complete financial autopsy. We sat in Evelyn's conference room, the sprawling city skyline serving as a stark backdrop to the impending destruction of my domestic life. Naomi projected her findings onto a large digital screen. She confirmed my darkest theory regarding the loan document. The metadata embedded in the digital signature on the new credit application was an exact, pixel-for-pixel match to the authorization file from our mortgage refinance 3 years prior. Grant had simply duplicated the file, dragging and dropping my consent onto a document that legally bound me to massive new debt. He pulled exactly $250,000 from the equity of your primary residence, Naomi stated, her voice devoid of any inflection. He told you he was halting the kitchen renovations due to interest rates, but he actually liquidated that anticipated capital. From there, the money entered a sophisticated washing cycle. She clicked to the next slide, revealing a complex web of transactional arrows. The funds did not simply rest in the Blue Aster Strategies account. Blue Aster was merely a temporary holding cell from that entity. Naomi traced a wire transfer of $35,000 directly to the leasing office of the Montgomery. It was not a corporate consulting fee. It was the security deposit and 6 months of prepaid luxury rent for a penthouse apartment leased exclusively under the name Sloan Mercer. I stared at the screen, the sterile white light reflecting in my eyes. The money I had saved by skipping vacations, the annual bonuses I had carefully invested, the equity built by painting our walls and maintaining our property, was literally paying for the panoramic city views of the woman currently sleeping with my husband. But the bleeding did not stop at residential real estate. Naomi tracked another series of rapid, heavy withdrawals. $12,000 was wired to a premier commercial photography studio. $8,000 went to a high-profile celebrity wardrobe stylist. $15,000 was paid to a boutique catering company. These were coded as marketing and research expenses for his current firm, Naomi explained, tapping her laser pointer against the screen, but cross-referencing the dates with the promotional materials you found for the Horizon Group. It is clear he is using marital funds to bankroll the launch of his new independent venture. You are the primary angel investor for the exact life he is building to replace you. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. I was unwittingly financing my own obsolescence. Evelyn folded her perfectly manicured hands on the glass table. We need him to confidently lie about these specific expenditures on the record. We need to establish a clear pattern of active, conscious deceit to negate any future claims of accidental financial mismanagement. Because my state allows one-party consent for recording conversations, I immediately purchased a small digital voice recorder. The next afternoon, I sat in my parked car during my lunch break. I took a deep breath, perfectly regulating my heart rate, and dialed Grant's number. I had to play the part of the slightly stressed, diligent wife handling mundane household chores. He answered on the third ring, his tone brisk and professional, punctuated by the background noise of a busy coffee shop. "Grant, I am so sorry to interrupt your afternoon," I said, injecting just the right amount of administrative anxiety into my voice. I am trying to get a head start on organizing our early tax preparation documents for the accountant. I am looking at the joint savings ledger, and there are several large, recurring transfers to a vendor called Blue Aster Strategies. The accountant needs me to categorize them. Do you happen to have the invoices for those? There was a pause on the line, just a fraction of a second too long. It was the microscopic hesitation of a liar rapidly searching his mental index for the correct alibi. "Oh, right," Grant replied smoothly, his voice dripping with condescending reassurance. "Do not worry about those, Lillian. Those are just standard pass-through expenses for a massive new hotel client we are courting out of state. It is highly confidential market research, completely above board and totally legitimate. Just leave them off the personal summary. I will have the firm's bookkeeper handle them on our end." "Are you absolutely sure?" I pressed, keeping my tone light but insistent. "Because the amounts are quite large, and they came directly out of our personal high-yield account, not the business operating fund. If the Internal Revenue Service audits us, I just want to make sure we have the proper paper trail." His calm demeanor vanished instantly. The fabricated patience fractured, revealing the ugly, cornered panic beneath. "I said I have it handled, Lillian," he snapped, his voice dropping an octave into a harsh warning register. "Stop digging into the business accounting. You do not understand how these complex corporate structures work. And honestly, if you try to make a massive deal out of standard financial maneuvering just because you are feeling insecure, remember this. Everyone at that dinner table heard me be completely transparent about wanting an open marriage first. They know I have been honest about my needs. You are the one choosing to be difficult and paranoid." I ended the call and pressed the stop button on the recorder. A cold, dark satisfaction settled deep in my chest. He genuinely believed his ridiculous, philosophical speech about open relationships acted as a blanket legal immunity for systemic financial fraud. He thought claiming he wanted to date other women gave him the right to forge my signature and steal my equity. That evening, I returned to the digital archives to verify his timeline of so-called honesty, while he was out at the luxury gym. I dug into a deeply buried, archived cloud storage folder linked to his old laptop backups. I found a file simply titled Asset Division Draft. It was a comprehensive, meticulously formatted spreadsheet detailing our checking accounts, the appraised value of the house, our retirement portfolios, and the vehicles. I checked the document properties. The file creation date was exactly 6 weeks prior to the dinner party at the Miller's house. He had calculated my exact net worth, divided our assets down to the last penny, and planned his financial exit strategy a month and a half before he ever stood up and raised his glass to toast to honesty. The entire speech was a premeditated, calculated farce. I sent the file directly to Naomi. Her response arrived in my inbox 20 minutes later. Her assessment was unequivocal. "This is textbook premeditation," Naomi wrote. "We have verifiable signs of digital forgery. We have the illegal, unauthorized transfer of marital assets. By proving he orchestrated this prior to his public declaration, we have established clear, malicious intent. This will undoubtedly carry severe civil liabilities, and depending on the judge, we have a very strong foundation to push for criminal consequences." The following day, after my shift ended, I walked out to the sprawling Cindervale Transit System's parking lot. The sun was setting, casting long, sharp shadows across the concrete. I unlocked my car, slid into the driver's seat, and closed the heavy door, sealing myself inside the quiet cabin. I did not start the engine. I just sat there in the fading light. I looked down at my 2 hands resting calmly on the leather steering wheel. My platinum wedding band caught a final glint of the evening sun. I waited for the crushing weight of grief to hit me. I waited for the tears to blur my vision. I waited for the heartbreak that society dictates a woman must profoundly feel when her entire world collapses. But the tears never came. My eyes remained perfectly dry. My chest felt incredibly light, almost entirely hollowed out. Staring at my hands, I finally understood the absolute truth. My marriage had not died at that dinner party. It had not died when I saw the forged signature or the lease agreement for his mistress. This marriage had been a cold, decaying corpse for a very long time. Grant was simply the man who tried to profit off the life insurance policy before officially declaring the time of death. And I was the compliance officer who was fully prepared to lock him in the morgue. I executed my departure with the same cold precision I apply to a corporate audit. There were no dramatic screaming matches in the hallway. I did not throw his expensive tailored suits onto the front lawn. While he was out at another fabricated late-night client meeting, I packed exactly 3 medium-sized suitcases. I took only my essential clothing, my personal documents, and my work electronics. I left my platinum wedding band resting perfectly centered on the marble kitchen island. By midnight, I was standing inside a furnished short-term rental apartment on the opposite side of the city, having signed a 6-month lease earlier that afternoon. The following morning, Evelyn Pike unleashed the first legal strike. She issued formal preservation of evidence letters to Grant, his business partners, and all associated banking institutions. These documents legally mandated that no financial records, digital communications, or assets could be altered, deleted, or moved under penalty of law. When a man who thrives on controlling the narrative suddenly finds himself speaking into an empty void, his first reaction is always a frantic escalation. Grant discovered the empty closet and the abandoned ring. He immediately expected a tearful phone call or a furious text message outlining my emotional demands. He received absolute silence. By noon, 24 white roses arrived at the reception desk of my transit authority office. I instructed the receptionist to throw them directly into the lobby trash can. Then came the emails. They arrived in my personal inbox in rapid, desperate succession. They were masterpieces of psychological manipulation. He started with soft, pseudo-apologetic prose, claiming he was utterly devastated that I had chosen to walk away instead of engaging in a healthy dialogue. When I did not reply after 4 hours, his tone sharply pivoted. The subsequent messages became deeply provocative. He accused me of overreacting, of acting like a petulant child, and of completely abandoning our shared history over a simple philosophical disagreement. "We need to sit down face to face like civilized adults," he wrote in an email dispatched at 2 o'clock in the morning. "You cannot simply vanish. Lillian, this silent treatment is incredibly immature. I laid my cards on the table because I respect you. You are punishing me for my honesty." I did not type a single word in response. I simply forwarded every email directly to Evelyn. For the first time in our entire relationship, Grant was entirely blind. He could not read my facial expressions. He could not manipulate my tone. He was throwing lines into the dark water, and absolutely nothing was biting. Unable to break my silence, Grant turned his attention to his favorite arena, our social circle. If he could not control me, he would control the public perception of my absence through the quiet, highly efficient grapevine of affluent wives and business partners. The rumors quickly trickled back to me. Grant was actively painting a portrait of a martyr. He told our mutual friends that my departure was a tragic but inevitable consequence of my own personality flaws. He carefully planted the seed that I was obsessively controlling, emotionally frigid, and far too married to my corporate compliance career to nurture a loving home. She just lost her tenderness. He reportedly told a fellow architect during a golf game on a Sunday morning, "I tried to introduce new, progressive ways to save our intimacy, but she is completely rigid. She operates her personal life like a strict corporate ledger. A man can only take so much coldness." He was systematically preconditioning the jury. When the divorce became public knowledge, he wanted everyone to sigh with sympathetic understanding, viewing him as a passionate man who had simply frozen to death in a loveless, sterile marriage. But carefully constructed lies have a fatal flaw. They require every single participant to remain completely unaware of the others. The structural integrity of Grant's entire narrative collapsed on a Tuesday evening, courtesy of a woman I had never met. I received a direct message on my professional networking profile. The sender was a woman named Noelle Grady. She worked as an art director for a local lifestyle magazine. Her message was brief, professional, and laced with a highly palpable sense of disgust. "Lillian, we do not know each other," Noelle wrote. "I recently saw a social media story posted by a mutual acquaintance referencing a very tense dinner party involving you and Grant. I asked around. And someone mentioned you two separated because Grant wanted an open marriage. I think you need to see these. I am so sorry." Attached to the message were 8 high-resolution screenshots of text conversations between Noelle and my husband. I called Noelle from my secure rental apartment. She was surprisingly calm, driven by the cold fury of a woman who realizes she has been used as a pawn. She explained that she had gone on 4 separate dinner dates with Grant over the past 2 months. "He never mentioned wanting an open marriage," Noelle told me, her voice sharp with indignation. "He told me you two had been legally separated for over 6 months. He said he was sleeping in the guest room while the lawyers finalized the asset division. He played the role of the lonely, heartbroken man waiting for his freedom. He swore to me he was practically single." I reviewed the screenshots she had sent. The timestamps perfectly coincided with the exact weeks Grant had been sitting on our living room sofa, debating the philosophical merits of radical honesty and non-traditional relationship models with me. "You are amazing, Noelle." Grant had texted her on a Friday night, precisely 1 hour after he told me he was stuck at a late zoning board meeting. "I cannot wait until this messy divorce is finally behind me so I can take you away for a proper weekend." This was the silver bullet. These digital files completely obliterated his entire defense strategy. He was not a brave pioneer of ethical non-monogamy. He was not a man seeking transparent, evolved boundaries. He was a standard, predatory liar. He was actively lying to the women he pursued by claiming he was already single, while simultaneously lying to his wife by claiming he merely wanted permission to stray. I immediately transmitted the screenshots and Noelle's sworn statement to Evelyn Pike. My lawyer did not hesitate. The combination of the forensic accounting data, which proved Grant was secretly siphoning marital funds into a corporate shell account, and Noelle's text messages, which proved a clear pattern of calculated deceit, gave us immense legal leverage. Evelyn marched into the family court chambers on Thursday morning and filed an emergency ex parte motion. She presented the judge with the forged signature on the home equity line of credit, the lease agreement for his mistress, and the blatant lies peddled to Noelle Grady. The judge did not require much convincing. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, a temporary restraining order was formally issued against our joint financial portfolios. A massive, impenetrable freeze was placed on the home equity line, the high-yield savings accounts, and the shared investment trusts. Grant was legally locked out of the exact vault he had been quietly robbing. That night, I sat alone in the quiet living room of my rental apartment. The city traffic hummed faintly against the glass of the window. At exactly 8 o'clock, my phone screen suddenly illuminated on the coffee table. It was Grant. He was likely standing at a cash register at an expensive restaurant, or perhaps trying to process a payment for his new boutique studio, only to discover his primary cards were abruptly declining. The legal notification of the frozen assets would have just landed in his email inbox. The phone vibrated continuously across the dark wood. I did not move to pick it up. I just sat back against the cushions and watched his name flash across the glowing screen. The call eventually dropped into voicemail. 10 seconds later, the screen lit up again, then a third time, then a fourth. He was panicking. The carefully curated script he had spent months writing had just been violently ripped from his hands. He was no longer the brilliant, untouchable director of our lives. He was completely trapped in a cage he did not even realize I had built around him. I watched the phone light up for the 5th time, and a profound, quiet peace washed over me. For over a decade, Grant had always dominated the airspace in our relationship. He dictated the moods. He controlled the conversations, and he orchestrated the silence when he wanted to punish me, but not tonight. Tonight, the heavy, suffocating silence belonged entirely to me, and it was deafening. When the temporary restraining order officially froze the joint bank accounts and investment portfolios, the oxygen in Grant's meticulously constructed world was instantly sucked out of the room. A man accustomed to absolute financial fluidity and unchecked control suddenly found himself unable to authorize a standard wire transfer without triggering a severe legal notification. Panic, I have learned through years of corporate compliance investigations, makes arrogant men do incredibly sloppy things. On a Tuesday afternoon, my former neighbor called my cell phone. She casually mentioned that a private, unmarked courier van was backed aggressively into our driveway. Two men were hastily loading several heavy, taped cardboard boxes from the ground floor study into the back of the vehicle. Grant was actively gutting his home office. In his frantic state, he believed that if he could just destroy the physical paper trail, if he could incinerate the printed vendor invoices, the cocktail lounge receipts, and the hard copies of the lease agreements, he could simply deny they ever existed. He was profoundly mistaken. He did not realize that weeks prior, I had spent hours sitting under the stark blue glow of my laptop screen, carefully photographing, archiving, and chaining every single piece of evidence into an immutable, time-stamped digital timeline. His desperate attempt at a physical purge did not erase his sins, it only magnified them. In the rigid world of civil litigation, destroying documents after receiving a formal preservation letter is called spoliation of evidence. It is a massive, glaring red flag that signals intentional guilt to any judge presiding over the case. By trying to cover his tracks, Grant was actively handing my lawyer the exact ammunition she needed to prove malicious intent. But the most significant crack in his armor did not come from his own panicked mistakes. It came from the people he forced to cover for him. Naomi Voss, my forensic accountant, had been relentlessly auditing the internal mechanics of Ridgeway Atelier. She quickly discovered that Grant could not execute this level of financial diversion without a trusted insider. He had utilized a human shield. Her name was Tessa Byrne. Tessa was a 23-year-old junior bookkeeper, fresh out of a local university, eager to impress the charismatic co-founder of the architectural firm. Grant had explicitly instructed her to manually override the standard accounting software to bury his personal expenditures. Naomi noticed a glaring, recurring anomaly in the general ledger. Tens of thousands of dollars spent on luxury residential furniture, high-end commercial photography, and boutique styling fees were forcefully miscategorized under a vague, internal departmental code labeled Brand Concept Research and Development. When Evelyn issued a sweeping aggressive subpoena for the unedited financial records of the firm, the reality of the situation crashed down on the young employee. Tessa suddenly realized she was not just balancing the books for a demanding boss. She was an active accomplice in marital fraud and potential corporate embezzlement. Terrified of ruining her early career, losing her professional accreditation, and facing criminal liability, Tessa quietly retained an independent lawyer and contacted our side. In Evelyn's sterile conference room on a rainy Thursday morning, Tessa handed over a decrypted flash drive containing the raw, unfiltered internal ledgers of Ridgeway Atelier. The numbers within those files revealed a truth far darker than simple infidelity. The ledger exposed that Grant was not merely using the forged home equity line of credit for immediate cash to fund his lifestyle. He had drafted a preliminary commercial loan application for his new hospitality venture with Sloan Mercer, and he had explicitly listed our shared marital residence as the primary physical collateral. He was prepared to risk the very roof over my head, without my knowledge or consent, to secure a multi-million-dollar commercial mortgage for a project entirely controlled by his mistress. Yet, the most spectacular and satisfying collapse came from within his own bloodline. The subpoenas Evelyn dispatched were broad, aggressive, and legally terrifying. One of those thick, certified envelopes landed on the pristine mahogany desk of Maren Hollowell, my sister-in-law, the woman who had smugly sat at my kitchen island diagnosing her brother with a harmless midlife crisis while drinking her expensive green tea. Instantly lost her sophisticated, defensive armor. Maren was a licensed commercial real estate broker, She knew exactly what it meant to be legally implicated in the fraudulent concealment of marital assets. The moment she read the formal demand for all electronic communications between her and Grant regarding his finances, his new business, and his marriage, her unshakable family loyalty evaporated into thin air. She did not call Grant to warn him. She did not stand by the younger brother she had coddled and protected for 4 decades. Instead, Marin panicked to save her own lucrative professional license. In a frantic, ruthless bid for self-preservation, she instructed her own attorney to dump everything directly onto Evelyn's desk to secure her own immunity from the impending legal fallout. I sat in Evelyn's office on a quiet Friday afternoon, reading through the thick stack of printed transcripts of Marin's surrendered text messages and emails. The network of complicity was absolutely staggering. It was not a private, spontaneous affair. It was a fully staffed, tightly managed production. Evelyn silently slid a specific printed email across the glass table. It was dated exactly 3 weeks before the dinner party. Grant had sent it to Marin at 2 o'clock in the morning. "I cannot just ask for a divorce out of nowhere," Grant had written to his sister. "Lillian will drag me through the mud and demand half of the new studio capital before it even launches. I need to control the narrative from the very beginning. I need a civilized public display so Lillian looks like a prude if she resists. If I offer an open marriage in front of David and Sarah, and she freaks out, she becomes the villain, then I can walk away clean, playing the victim. And nobody will look too closely at the business accounts while we separate." I read the words again. The black ink on the white paper felt like a heavy, blunt object striking my chest. But not with pain. It struck with absolute clarity. The dinner party at the Miller's house was no longer just a humiliating, bizarre memory of a failing marriage. It was now admissible. Concrete proof of premeditated psychological abuse and financial manipulation. He had actively conspired with his own family to emotionally ambush me in front of my peers, solely to create a convenient smokescreen for his theft. A profound, irreversible shift occurred in the power dynamic of our impending divorce. The people Grant had relied upon to build his stage, to write his manipulative lines, and to manage his lighting were now terrified of the raging fire he had started. They were desperately ripping down the heavy velvet curtains and smashing the set pieces, violently scrambling to distance themselves from the lead actor before the entire theater collapsed. A man can sustain a magnificent, elaborate lie for a very long time, but only until his loyal accomplices suddenly realize they are about to be buried in the exact same grave. The legal machinery we set into motion did not simply strike Grant, it systematically dismantled the entire ecosystem that sustained his inflated ego. Evelyn Pike did not pause to let the dust settle. She drafted a highly specific, aggressively worded formal demand and bypassed Grant entirely, serving it directly to the senior partners at Ridgway Atelier. The document explicitly mandated the immediate preservation of all corporate credit card statements, expense reports, and internal communications regarding the commingling of company funds with personal expenses. Architects and designers like to view themselves as creative visionaries, but at the executive level, they are ruthless pragmatists. The small board of directors convened an emergency closed-door meeting on a Monday morning. They did not want their boutique firm dragged into a messy, highly publicized marital fraud dispute that could trigger an aggressive audit from the Internal Revenue Service. They had seen the preliminary ledgers. They knew Grant had crossed a dangerous line. By noon, Grant was formally asked to temporarily step down from all daily operations and client management while an independent auditor reviewed the internal books. His corporate email access was suspended. His building keycard was deactivated. The prestigious title he wore like an impenetrable shield was abruptly stripped away. He was cast out of the very kingdom he had helped build, sacrificed by his own partners to prevent the infection from spreading to the rest of the company. The domino effect accelerated rapidly. Sloane Mercer was a creature of highly calculated optics. She built her entire career on projecting an image of effortless, disruptive success. She marketed herself to wealthy founders and venture capitalists, not to men drowning in civil litigation with completely frozen bank accounts. The moment the temporary restraining order froze the capital, meant for their new hospitality studio, the romance abruptly evaporated. When Sloane realized the luxury penthouse she was currently living in was financed by stolen marital equity, and that the money was now subject to aggressive clawback lawsuits, she recognized the severe danger to her own brand. Grant was no longer a wealthy, reborn creative genius stepping bravely into his authentic truth. He was a colossal, toxic liability. She was not looking for a messy legal battle over stolen funds. She was looking for a fully funded investor. She stopped returning his calls. She packed her designer bags and vacated the apartment before the weekend, realizing her entire business plan was built on a foundation of my hijacked paycheck. The illusion of the reinvented, modern man shattered the exact second the stolen money stopped flowing. Stripped of his company, abandoned by his mistress, and financially paralyzed, Grant finally appeared at my door. It was a Thursday night, and it was raining hard. The security intercom in my short-term rental buzzed. I did not buzz him up, but he managed to slip into the lobby behind a food delivery driver and rode the elevator to my floor. When I opened my heavy wooden door, the sight of him was genuinely jarring. The man standing in the brightly lit hallway was entirely unrecognizable from the arrogant, perfectly tailored husband who had confidently raised his crystal glass at the dinner party just weeks ago. His expensive linen shirt was deeply wrinkled and untucked at the waist. The skin around his eyes was puffy, dark, and bruised with exhaustion. He smelled faintly of stale scotch and damp wool. His broad shoulders, usually pulled back with supreme self-importance, were slumped in total defeat. "This has gone entirely too far," Grant said, his voice cracking, lacking any of its usual smooth, commanding resonance. "You are destroying the future for both of us. Please, just let me come inside. We need to stop this madness." I stood in the doorway, blocking his entry. I looked at his face, searching for a single ounce of genuine remorse. I looked for the deep, agonizing regret of a man who realized he had profoundly broken the heart of the woman he promised to love and protect. I found absolutely nothing of the sort. What I saw in his bloodshot eyes was pure, unadulterated panic. It was the desperate terror of a lead actor who had just been shoved onto a brightly lit stage, only to realize the entire audience had already read the script, examined the props, and knew the entire performance was a cheap, fraudulent illusion. He was not sorry for what he did to me. He was terrified that he could no longer act his way out of the consequences. When his plea for sympathy failed to move me, he rapidly shifted his tactical approach. He began hurling excuses against the wall, desperately hoping one would stick. "It was not entirely my fault," he pleaded, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the door frame. "You have to understand the immense pressure I was under, the heavy expectations of being a successful provider, of carrying the image of the firm. I had a massive textbook midlife crisis. My judgment was completely clouded by the stress. And Sloane, she manipulated me. She pushed me to secure that funding for the new studio. She preyed on my vulnerabilities when I was feeling lost. Even Marin fed my paranoia, telling me I needed to prepare an exit strategy to protect my assets. I was surrounded by terrible advice. I just lost my way." None of his frantic rationalizations touched the cold, hard data. A midlife crisis might explain a sudden urge to buy an expensive sports car or a temporary lapse in judgment at a hotel bar. It does not explain a meticulously executed, multi-month campaign of financial forgery, secret postal boxes, and coordinated psychological abuse. He was tossing the women in his life under the bus with breathtaking speed, proving his loyalty extended only as far as his own immediate self-preservation. Then came the final, bitter twist, the ultimate revelation of his profound selfishness. He took a step closer, his tone dropping into a low, conspiratorial whisper, as if we were negotiating a corporate merger in a private boardroom. "We can fix this," Grant urged, his eyes wide with desperate negotiation. "I will completely drop the new studio idea. I will cut all contact with Sloane forever. I will come back home, and we can reset everything to the way it was." We can go to intensive marriage counseling for 6 months, or a year, whatever you want. We can just sweep this away and start over. But you have to call off Evelyn Pike. You have to drop the forensic audit. You have to withdraw the injunctions and unfreeze the accounts by tomorrow morning. Please. If we just stand together, we can save what we built. I stared at him, letting the absolute absurdity of his proposition hang in the quiet air of the hallway. He was offering me the grand prize of his physical presence, but only on the strict condition that I actively participate in covering up his crimes. He wanted me to rescind the legal protection I had built for myself so he could instantly regain access to the money he had stolen. He was explicitly proving that our marriage held absolutely zero intrinsic value to him. It was only valuable when it served as a protective fortress against his own ruin. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream at him for his audacity. I simply looked at the hollow, desperate man standing before me, feeling an overwhelming sense of emotional exhaustion finally lifting from my shoulders. "You do not miss me," I said, my voice quiet, steady, and completely devoid of any remaining affection. "You only miss the wall I used to be to shield you." I gently pushed the heavy door forward until the locking mechanism clicked firmly into place, leaving him standing entirely alone in the brightly lit corridor. I walked over to the large window in my living room and looked out at the glowing city skyline. For the very first time since the night of the dinner party, the heavy, suffocating fog completely cleared. I finally saw Grant with absolute clarity. He was not a complex, tortured visionary. He was not a sophisticated architect of modern life. He was just an incredibly ordinary, mediocre man. And I had spent over a decade utterly exhausting myself trying to pretend he was something more. Just when the concrete dust seemed to settle over the wreckage of our marriage, Grant found a final, desperate reserve of venom, realizing that the standard defense playbook was completely useless against a forensic audit. He fired his initial, relatively moderate attorney in his place. He hired a notorious, highly aggressive litigator from a massive corporate firm located across the state line. This new lawyer did not play traditional defense. He specialized in creating chaotic, aggressive diversions to force a panicked settlement, exactly 14 days before our scheduled court appearance. Evelyn Pike summoned me to her office. Her usually impassive face held a tight, rigid line of tension that I had never seen before. Grant had launched a severe, high-stakes counteroffensive. He formally accused me of federal cybercrimes. His new legal team filed a massive motion to suppress nearly all of our foundational evidence, claiming I had illegally hacked into his personal, password-protected devices, bypassed encrypted security firewalls, and fundamentally violated his right to privacy. The legal threat was incredibly dangerous. If the judge agreed with their motion under the doctrine of the poisonous tree, the financial screenshots, the Horizon Group presentation, and the initial geographical tracking data would be completely thrown out of court. Grant would miraculously pivot from a deceitful, thieving embezzler into the traumatized victim of a deranged, cyber-stalking wife. But Grant had, once again, vastly underestimated the precise nature of my profession. I am a compliance officer. I do not rely on lucky guesses, and I certainly do not break the rules to catch a rule breaker. When Evelyn presented their aggressive motion across the glass table, I simply opened my meticulously organized physical case file. I did not panic. I explained to her, with absolute documented proof, that I had not bypassed a single unauthorized security protocol. Every piece of digital evidence I personally collected was legally accessible to me, I told Evelyn, sliding the printed service agreements toward her. The financial records I initially pulled were from a joint banking portal where my name is legally registered as a primary account holder. The geographical vehicle data came from a maintenance application we both pay for out of a joint checking account, using a shared family password. The tablet containing his business presentation and the text messages with his sister was a communal household device, purchased with our shared credit card, and left unlocked directly on our living room coffee table. Everything else, the corporate ledgers from Tessa Byrne, the luxury apartment lease, the forged home equity line of credit, was legally acquired through your ironclad subpoenas and Naomi Voss conducting her certified audits. There was absolutely no poisoned fruit on my tree. Every single branch was perfectly legal. While his expensive new lawyer was busy throwing wild, fabricated accusations at the wall, Grant made one final, catastrophic, and completely unforced error. Naomi Voss called me on a Tuesday evening, her usually monotone voice laced with a rare thread of genuine professional excitement. During her final, sweeping review of the subpoenaed corporate server data from his architectural firm, she uncovered a newly uploaded digital file. It was an internal business memorandum, supposedly written by Grant and formally addressed to the firm's senior accounting department. The document clearly stated that I, Lillian Moore, was fully aware of the cash transfers to Blue Aster Strategies and had enthusiastically given my explicit verbal consent to use our marital savings for his independent brand research. The date typed perfectly at the top of the memorandum was from exactly 6 months ago. However, Grant was a designer of luxury hotels, not a digital forensics expert. He did not understand how foundational computer metadata functioned. Naomi ran a routine extraction protocol on the file. The hidden digital footprint, the unalterable code embedded directly into the document history, revealed a devastating truth. The file had not been created 6 months ago. It had been authored, saved, and uploaded exactly 4 days after the judge had issued the temporary restraining order freezing our joint assets. In a blind panic over his lack of funds, Grant had typed up a fake permission slip and manually altered the visible date on his word processor. Completely ignorant of the permanent digital timestamps tracking his every keystroke, it was no longer just a messy civil dispute over hidden money. It was now concrete. Undeniable documentary forgery submitted during an active legal proceeding. He had essentially handed the judge the exact weapon needed to destroy him, as his legal foundation rapidly crumbled into dust. His social fortress collapsed right alongside it. The affluent friends he had tried to weaponize against me slowly began to realize the true, ugly nature of the dinner party. Our former host, David, called me on a Sunday afternoon. He sounded deeply embarrassed, exhausted, and incredibly angry. David explained that Grant had recently tried to borrow $50,000 from him to cover his mounting legal retainer fees, using the exact same victim narrative he had deployed at the dinner table. But David had spoken to Noel Grady's social circle. The undeniable truth about Grant posing as a legally separated, entirely single man while still living in my house had spread through the local country club like a vicious, uncontainable wildfire. "We feel absolutely sick about that night, Lillian," David told me, his voice heavy with profound regret. "We all thought he was just having an unconventional emotional awakening. We had no idea he was using us as a theatrical audience to set you up for a financial slaughter. Sarah has blocked his number. We are completely done with him." The audience had not just walked out of the theater, they had actively turned on the director. The night before the final deposition and settlement hearing, I experienced my first true bout of insomnia. I stood by the large, cold window of my rental apartment, watching the city lights blink against the dark. Heavy rain clouds. The sheer volume of evidence we had amassed was utterly lethal. If Evelyn presented the forged digital signature on the home loan alongside the newly backdated corporate memorandum to the district attorney, Grant would not just lose the divorce settlement. He would lose his prestigious architectural license. He would face severe perjury charges. He could very realistically face years in federal prison for wire fraud and identity theft. I held the absolute power to completely obliterate his entire existence. I wrestled with the heavy, dark temptation of total vengeance. Part of me, the deeply bruised and betrayed wife who had given him the best years of her youth, wanted to burn his kingdom straight to the ground and salt the earth so absolutely nothing could ever grow there again. I wanted him to feel a fraction of the profound humiliation and terror he had so coldly planned for me. But as the digital clock on the kitchen microwave clicked to 3 o'clock in the morning, the searing, blinding anger slowly dissolved into a quiet, cold, and absolute clarity. I realized that seeking emotional revenge would require me to roll around in the exact same toxic mud he inhabited. It would permanently tie my emotional state to his prolonged suffering. I did not want to destroy him out of hatred, because hatred still required me to care about him. I simply wanted to eradicate his presence from my life entirely. I chose not to play the role of the vengeful, dramatic executioner. I chose to let the blind, indifferent, and crushing machinery of the justice system process him exactly as the fraudulent data point he had proven himself to be. The morning of the hearing arrived crisp and blindingly bright. I put on a tailored navy blue suit, pinned my hair back with absolute precision, and drank a single cup of black coffee. When I walked through the heavy revolving doors of the downtown courthouse, I felt an extraordinary, overwhelming sense of lightness. I was not the shattered, weeping woman Grant had desperately tried to write into his tragic script. I was not a fragile victim seeking pity or emotional validation from a judge. As my low heels clicked rhythmically against the polished marble floors of the grand hallway, I walked with the unshakable posture of a survivor. I was the last person still standing in a narrative that had been rotten at the core from the very beginning. The heavy oak doors of family court closed behind me, sealing us inside a room where narratives die and only documented facts survive. The final settlement hearing was not a sprawling, dramatic television trial. It was a surgical, sterile dismantling of a man's entire fabricated existence. Evelyn Pike stood at the plaintiff's table, radiating the terrifying calm of a predator who had already cornered her prey. Spread out before her were the final, undeniable puzzle pieces. There was the supplementary credit line application bearing my duplicated signature, the sequential chain of banking transfers to Blue Aster Strategies, the executed luxury apartment lease, the sworn deposition from Naomi Voss, the internal corporate ledger provided by Tessa Byrne, the desperate emails from Marin Hollowell, and the damning text message screenshots from Noelle Grady. Grant sat 2 tables away. His aggressively expensive new litigator attempted to weave a desperate, deeply flawed narrative for the presiding judge. His defense clung violently to the original, highly rehearsed script. The lawyer argued that Grant was simply a progressive husband who had bravely attempted to communicate honestly about his non-traditional marital needs. The lawyer claimed that the chaotic financial maneuvers were merely the unfortunate, sloppy result of immense business pressure and creative distraction, entirely devoid of malicious intent. He tried to paint Grant as an overwhelmed visionary, and me as a vindictive, scorned woman intentionally misinterpreting his cry for freedom. Evelyn did not object. She let the man say his piece, allowing the hollow excuses to echo off the wood-paneled walls. When it was her turn to address the court, she did not raise her voice. She simply picked up a stack of printed exhibits and began systematically destroying his defense, brick by brick. If your client was truly committed to honest communication regarding an open marriage, Evelyn asked, her voice ringing out crisp and sharp, why did he explicitly tell multiple other women that he was completely single and legally separated weeks before he ever spoke to his wife? If this was a spontaneous desire for freedom, why did he draft a comprehensive asset division spreadsheet a full month and a half prior to his public confession? If these financial transfers were innocent business mistakes, why did he deliberately forge his wife's electronic signature to leverage her primary residence? And finally, if he had nothing to hide, why did he attempt to submit a backdated corporate memorandum after this court had already frozen his accounts? Grant sank lower into his leather chair, the color completely drained from his face. His expensive lawyer flipped frantically through his legal pad, searching for a defense that simply did not exist. But the absolute climax of the hearing, the moment the final nail was driven cleanly into the coffin, occurred when Evelyn introduced Exhibit F. It was the email Grant had sent to his sister at 2 o'clock that morning. Evelyn adjusted her reading glasses and read the most damning line directly into the official court record. I need to control the narrative from the very beginning. The silence in the courtroom was absolute and suffocating. The judge, a stern woman with decades of experience wading through domestic deception, slowly lowered her pen. She stared down from the bench, fixing Grant with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. The email explicitly proved that Grant never desired a dialogue. He never wanted a mutual agreement. He only wanted a theatrical stage, an audience, and a fabricated excuse to walk out the door with a stolen fortune. Using the modern concept of an open marriage as a moral shield to actively conceal systematic financial fraud is one of the most cynical legal strategies I have seen in my courtroom, the judge stated, her tone freezing the air in the room. Your argument lacks even a single shred of credibility. The ruling was swift, devastating, and entirely one-sided. The judge awarded 100% ownership of the marital house exclusively to me. She ordered Grant to fully repay every single dollar he had wrongfully transferred, applying severe additional compensatory penalties for the emotional and financial distress he intentionally inflicted. But the civil penalties were merely the beginning. Before striking her gavel, the judge formally announced that she was transferring the files containing the forged loan signature and the backdated corporate memorandum directly to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal review. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement in the back row of the public gallery. Sloane Mercer had quietly slipped into the courtroom halfway through the proceedings, likely hoping to witness the triumphant victory of her wealthy new partner. Instead, she watched his entire empire burn to the ground, as the judge mentioned criminal fraud and severe financial restitution. Sloane abruptly stood up. She did not look at Grant. She pushed open the heavy wooden doors and vanished into the hallway, finally realizing she had never stepped into a grand, romantic love story. She had simply stepped into a highly calculated exit plan, one that was entirely funded by the stolen life of another woman. When the hearing officially concluded, the courtroom slowly emptied. I gathered my purse and walked out into the expansive marble-lined corridor. Grant was waiting near the elevator banks. His expensive lawyer had already abandoned him, storming off toward the stairwell while angrily scrolling through his phone. Grant looked entirely broken. The arrogant posture, the polished charm, the smug superiority were all completely gone, replaced by the hollow, terrified stare of a man staring directly into the abyss of his own making. He took a hesitant step toward me. "Lillian," he said, his voice a pathetic, gravelly whisper. "You won. You took absolutely everything. It did not have to be this cruel. We spent over a decade together. You did not have to completely destroy me." I stopped walking. I looked at the man who had confidently stood up at a dinner party and demanded that I fight for the privilege of keeping him. I felt absolutely nothing. There was no anger, no sorrow, no lingering spark of love. There was only the quiet, incredibly peaceful emptiness of a closed ledger. "You are mistaken, Grant," I replied, my voice perfectly level, short and cold. "This is not cruelty. This is just the bill arriving." I turned away before he could formulate another pathetic excuse. I pressed the silver button for the elevator, stepped inside the empty car, and watched the heavy metal doors slide shut, permanently severing him from my life. When I finally pushed through the front doors of the courthouse, the bright, late-afternoon sun washed over me. The humid city air felt incredibly clean. I walked down the wide concrete steps, feeling the heavy, invisible weight of the past 14 months completely dissolve. The victory I achieved today was not marked by a loud cheer or a dramatic celebration. It was marked by a profound, unshakable realization. The true prize I had won back was not the restored bank accounts, the unencumbered deed to the house, or the legal validation of my pain. What I had truly won was my absolute autonomy. I had reclaimed the fundamental right to never again sit quietly in the dark as an involuntary audience member in a fraudulent life directed by someone else. The man who had so arrogantly demanded that I enter a humiliating competition to win his hollow affection ultimately lost absolutely everything. He lost because he failed to realize one simple, undeniable truth. I had completely refused to play his game from the very beginning. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. And I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop your city or country in the comments below so we can connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to the Olivia Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and support me even more by hitting that hype button so this story can reach and empower even more people.